In our last vlog, we had spent £2,060 making and fitted a unistrut roof rack, fitting two 200 watt solar panels from Renogy, fitting a max air fan, cutting out 6 holes for windows, and paying a professional to fit the windows, saving us stress, time, and perhaps money. In part 3 of this fan build series, we will be making a frame for a bed over garage, fitting flooring to the garage, applying sound deadening, SHEEPWOOL insulation and sidewalls to the garage, making wheel arch covers, installing shore power, and fitting a 60 litre over wheel arch fresh water tank. Do follow this van build series as we apply simple methods to van building as we convert this van into a home from home for our friends Darren and Amy to a budget of £12,000. We will cost all aspects of the build and at the end of every episode give you a running total for your interest. Before we start building our van, it's a good idea to strip out any unneeded panel work, followed by a good deep clean. Starting with a good clean, unrestricted environment allows you to cast a good eye over what you have to work with, allowing your mind to plan any build ideas and processes. You'll find yourself spending hours staring at an empty van, imagining in your own mind's eye where systems and furnishings will go, and how you're going to make it happen. Only the bulkhead to remove, we knew those problem sills would be in need of our attention, which we have covered in depth in our previous vlog.
Do you know what you'd be better off doing?
What?
Pulling all these rubber bungs out, getting the jet washer out and jet washing the whole lot out.
Is it that bad?
Yeah. Like I say, you could plant tomatoes in that soil.
So underneath the sills of the van and the outside there's some rubber bungs and they're drain bungs. They're like a little one-way valve bung as well. So these things are designed to fill up with water. Because they've got galvanised body shells, somebody thought it might be a good idea that, oh, these things won't rot, so therefore we'll just allow it to get wet. But unfortunately, where those galvanised edges are cut or where they're bent, they're prone to rust. So that wasn't very successful. But if I show you just along this line, there you go, can you see these little kiddies here? These are the little one-way valves that are running in those sills, and they block up with the mud and the silt that you've seen, and then your sills fill up full of water. And a problem point on these vehicles is just here where it tends to accumulate and rot. So if you ever see any little rust marks or rust blebs here, you can guarantee it's quite corroded on the inside of the van. So if you're looking for one of these vans to buy or purchase, do look at this area here for any repair work or any welding work. Right, okay, so Nicky had the good idea of taking the bungs out and jet washing out the sills. And all you need to do is grab a screwdriver like that, just pop them, can you see that under there, and literally pry them out like that. Oh, look at all that muck. Oh, we'll soon have all that out. Just remember to save these things, give them a good wash out before you put them back. We then proceeded to treat the sills and take measures to prevent any future problems. Because this is a much reported problem, we decided to produce a vlog just on this issue, which documents well why the sills fill with water and silt, and then the treatment and the prevention. Now before we can continue to start the habitat, we have one more problem area to sort out and remedy, and that's the corrosion that's always found behind the sliding door track. I'm getting conscious of the fact that there's probably not going to be too many days left this year now suitable for me to do any more painting or sealing. So while the sun's shining, you've got to make hay. And one of the things we've got to do before we can start work on the interior of the van is do some repair work on this slide. This is an area that's not uncommon on these vehicles to corrode behind the slide. The reason being, when this door opens and shuts, there is some minor movement on this slide, and over a period of time that rubs away the paint, rubs away the galvanized coating, and leaves little rust patches under here. Now when you build the interior of your van, access to this is denied, which makes it quite a difficult problem to solve in the future. So while the van is bare on the interior and we have access to all the fixings, we're going to take this off, do the repair work that's behind here, and then pop it back together again with some sealant, fasten it nice and tight so it probably doesn't move again. So even if you've got a new van, I would still be tempted to take this off and bond it back into place with some polyurethane sealant to try and stop as much of that movement as possible, because in the future it will be a problem.
The nuts are undone that secure the rail to the side of the van, leaving at least one loose to hold the rail temporarily in place. Externally, the Torx bolt is removed that holds the rail to the corner. Then with the door closed, the loose nuts can be removed, along with the rail. With soapy water, we can clean away the buildup of dirt, exposing the extent of the rust we need to treat. Applying masking tape confines the area, giving a good visual reference, and helps protect the surrounding area. A sanding disc and wire wheel on an angle grinder makes light use of removing the rust back to bare metal. Smoothed out with wet and dry, and finished with a Scotch pad. Cleaning off any residue with panel wipe, we then prime the exposed metal and remove the masking tape. Any overspray is removed with wet and dry and finished off with a Scotch pad, making ready for the top coat. A quick panel wipe, and on goes our paint. Unseen behind the rail, we are happy with just a good coat of paint, so any imperfections can be excused. A cutting compound takes care of any overspray and blends the paint into the surrounding area. The rail can now be cleaned and degreased with panel wipe before applying any polyurethane sealant, concentrating around each bolt and a solid top line. On goes the rail and loosely goes on the fixings, checking the door runs smooth before a final tighten.
Now it might be a good idea to run a bead of polyurethane sealant at the top of this rail between the body and the rail itself. That is firmly on there now, both mechanically bonded by the actual nuts and bolts and chemically bonded by the polyurethane sealant. So that is good and firm, better than the factory fit. But we can go a little bit further and stop any rainwater ingression and mud and silt build-up by running a bead of polyurethane sealant down that crack. So if you're feeling confident enough, give it a go freehand. If not, we can do the same as what we did with the skylight and run some masking tape down there and use some soapy water to get a nice little bead. There's a time I used to do that freehand. Not no more. Now, what you don't want it to do is dry before you take your masking tape off. So we're going to do that now, just as we've applied it. And if you feel confident enough, some more soapy water. Finishes that off nicely. Time for a beer. With all external works completed and problem areas made good to last, it's now time to make a start on building the habitat. Now, unlike any other vlog you may have seen,
We have been given a budget of £12,000 and an EcoFlow portable power pack in order to build with. And having already spent £2,000 on exterior works, we now have £10,000 left to build all systems and habitat. And unlike any other vlogs you may have seen, we will be building this van in zones and starting with this bed over garage. Our van build has started from a fixed location, here at the back of the van. Our bed over garage had to be a certain height, a certain width and a certain length, not only to sleep Nikki and I, but to house our mountain bikes underneath. It would have been no good starting my van build here at the front of the van with an elaborate kitchen, or a shower room, or a toilet, so big perhaps that by the time we got back to here we had no space for our sleeping area and our mountain bikes. So this was a great place to start and a great fixed point. The idea of me treating all of these areas separately is that if in the future something arises where a zone has to be repaired or replaced, this can be done completely independently of every other zone which will remain working. So it's all about access and maintenance. One thing we came to realise as well is that by dividing a van build into zones can have a huge impact on motivation. Dividing a van build into small bite-sized pieces can be less stressful and daunting than taking on the enormity of the whole van build. And as each zone is completed, you can sooner experience a sense of accomplishment, which will give you much motivation to plan and then continue the rest of your van build. Now, like our van build, Darren and Amy want to transport 2 mountain bikes. But unlike our van build, we have to work to a budget. Fortunately, Darren and Amy's van lifestyle is more part-time than full-time, so compromises can be made considering it unlikely they'd want to be carrying everything all the time. This will make the garage build less complicated and affordable, but without compromise on quality and functionality. But before we start the garage build, like everything else, there's always some preparation work to do, and that includes sealing some holes. More often than not, if you're converting an older van, you will often find holes in the floor from where the old floorboards were screwed down or where there's some chairs been. And often on Facebook I see people asking, how do you address those holes? How do you fill them in? Well, as long as they're non-structural, they don't need to be welded. One option is to use a seam sealer. This is used throughout the entirety of your van on all joints and can be brushed on. Some people recommend a rivet. I don't suggest using a rivet. Rivets, more often than not, are aluminium, and aluminium and steel do not like each other at all. An aluminium rivet will corrode the whole area around the steelwork. I see some people recommending filler. Filler's fine, but it sets quite hard and can be brittle and can fall out, but also it's porous, it can hold water, so I'm not going to be filling. Some people recommend bonding a coin. Nothing wrong with that, that'll work. What I'm going to be using on the small holes that I've got in the floor of the van is the same polyurethane sealant that we've used to seal the skylights and the windows, and I'm going to show you how. So this is one of the holes in my floor that I need to fill. It's been left over from where the original floor came out and it was screwed down to. I had to use my angle grinder to get those screws out, so I've taken a little bit of the paint away and it's just started to corrode a little bit. So all I'm going to do is give that a quick scotch, a quick wipe with panel wipe, just to make sure that's nice and clean so my paint sticks well to it. I'm now going to use a galvanizing spray because I don't need a primer or a top coat for this. So while that paint is quickly drying on the floor of the van, I've gone underneath to put some masking tape over the bottom of the holes I'm going to be filling. And this is so when I start filling, it doesn't squirm and worm out the bottom. Totally unnecessary. In other words, I'm only filling the hole with all that's needed. So now that paint is dry, we can take our caulking gun with some polyurethane sealant and just fill those holes. I often find if you want to smooth that out, strangely enough, if you spit on your finger, here you go guys, simple as that. Once the sealant's dry, you can remove the tape, get a little bit of car body under seal, just dab it on the bottom. Some of the holes I need to fill are threaded, where there's been some fixing points. So all I'm going to do is put some of the polyurethane sealant onto a stainless steel dome-headed nut and just screw it in. Mickey went around all of the floor of the van, marking all the holes with a Sharpie pen. A sanding disc, rather than a grinding disc, makes for a better preparation, polishing the metal surface rather than making rough gouges with lots of sparks that can embed in the painted floor, rust and look unsightly. Out again comes the panel wipe to clean and degrease the area, and then we can apply the polyurethane sealant. Soapy water though does perhaps make a more hygienic option than spit to smooth over the sealant. With the van prepped, we are almost ready to lay a floor in the garage area. However, the floor is directly proportionate to the width of our bed, so it was important to first fit the bed frame to give us a point of reference to align the garage floor. Inevitably, that will give us a perfectly aligned garage bulkhead. I always like to fit a double bed at 140 centimeters wide. I also like to fit the bed inside of the rear light clusters. This not only gives us space away from the drafty back doors, but allows us to keep the bed square, fit thermal curtains, perhaps a bedside cabinet, but with an extra 30mm added, allows for a bed to back door divide, a bed to living area bulkhead that aligns to the centre of a very useful support. This is also a very useful point that will become evident as we continue to build this van. Now Darren and Amy, like us, want to transport mountain bikes. The bed over garage height therefore needs to be a little higher than where people usually mount a bed over garage. We achieve this by using two pieces of 100 by 40 by 4mm angled alloy and cut to a desired 1430mm. Remembering also to smooth off those now sharp edges. In the van's frame is a useful 8mm riv nut. Its position we mark, and measuring from where our bed frame starts, transfer that measurement to our angled alloy. We first drill with a pilot hole and then out to 8.5 or 9mm. A 12mm drill bit I use to remove any burred metal from around the hole, pushing down gently as to not drill right through. The angled alloy can now be secured at one end, while we align and clamp the angle into the desired position. Now it gets messy. I'm sure there must be a better way, but I now dip a finger into a pot of primer, often left over from a window install, and slipping my hand through slots found in the top of the van's frame, dab my finger onto the alloy beam through many holes that exist along the framework. We now have perfectly aligned points to be drilled out with a pilot and again to 9mm. These are now our fixing points to attach the angle to the frame of the van, but first we need to cut a 40 by 4mm rubber strip which will become a partial thermal break and dampen any noise or vibration between the two surfaces. I can now preload the beam and rubber with 8mm stainless steel dome-headed bolts, which help keep the rubber in situ and slot the beam into place. The bolts hold the beam in place as we reach into the upper beam slots, affix a nut and tighten it. We will be insulating the floor of Darren and Amy's van and adding some wooden beams to help support the ply floor and the weight it may be carrying. Now it's a good idea to cut out and make that plywood floor first, as to not damage the insulation from toing and froing. And while we're at it, we can make some ply sidewalls. So that's our bed support frame firmly in place. It was an easy job to do. You could manage to get your fingers down those little holes in order to get the nuts and bolts in there, so that wasn't too tricky. And now what that's given us is the height that we need in order for Darren to get his bikes underneath his bed. So I deliberately left a gap of approximately 12mm right at the very edge of those angled iron frames. The reason being that's where our bed's going to end. The bed is not going to go all the way to the back doors because, as we learnt in our van build, leaving that space, leaving that gap meant for a much more comfortable night's sleep without any drafts or any cold striking through. So the van itself actually gives you a dedicated line that you can see running all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. And may I suggest that that is an ideal point to stop the build of the interior of your van. So just underneath where we've mounted the angle to support our bed frame, we need to be lining the sides of our garage walls. And on the van itself, you will notice an indentation that runs all the way along that top, all the way along that side, all the way along the back,
which lines up with the holes that run across the back of your wheel arch, and a couple of 3 holes on the floor down here as well. And that is a complete flat surface that would have perhaps mounted factory trim. So what we're going to do is mimic where that factory trim would have gone, and we're going to cut out a piece of ply to fit there, sandwiching in our insulation and providing a little bit of support also for a few little electrics that we're putting in here.
A cardboard template was made of the garage area sidewall before being transferred to a sheet of 12mm plyboard that had already been cut to a desired height and length. The wheel arch was scribed with a pencil and cut with a jigsaw before being offered up for a trial fit. The opposing side is a mirror image, so with one side completed, it could be used as a template for making the other. The floor is the same, so only one template around one wheel arch was made and transferred to one half of our plywood floor to again be scribed and cut with a jigsaw. Knowing that one half fitted well, we could flip the board, check, and use as a template to make the other half. Knowing that all fitted well, we could progress to fixing supports and the insulation for the garage floor. Now, like our van build, Darren and Amy want to transport mountain bikes, but Darren's mountain bike has a lot more suspension travel than mine. So this means we have to increase the bed height from the van's floor by 15mm. Rather than raise the bed, it made more sense to lower the garage floor, and we could achieve this by insulating with 10mm XPS Pro board rather than the usual 25mm PIR board that's more commonly used. The XPS Pro board is more expensive, but can give us a comparable insulation rating with high weight bearing properties. Now, XPS Pro could be placed directly onto the van's floor without any support buttons. Your ply could then be screwed directly through the van's floor. I prefer not to make holes in the van's floor, so 10mm strips of wood were bonded to the floor across the ribs of the van to leave good airflow. Some people apply sound deadening to the floor, but once you've added insulation, board, coverings, cabinets and contents, trust me, that's all the sound deadening you'll need. The floor went in and with added weight was left overnight for the bond to set firm. We could then easily cut the XPS insulation and place in between our wooden support slats. I had some sheeted foil left over from a laminate floor install, so didn't think it would be a bad idea to cover over the top for some added reflectics, taping over the joints and wood for a neat sealed finish. I always treat any bare wood to protect it from the damp conditions that can be experienced in a van. Imagine wood is like a sponge and can easily absorb moisture, warp, and if using tongued and grooved as many do, can gap and split. Towards the metalwork of the van, the garage baseboards and side panels were painted with VOC-free varnish. Visible sides were then primed with a high-build white primer and then coated with hard-wearing Raptor white load liner. If you don't have the facilities to spray, don't worry. Raptor gives an excellent textured finish if applied with a roller. Fitting the floor to our garage is now straightforward. Fitting the sides to the garage, though, can be a bit of a process. Remember I mentioned this?
You'll notice an indentation, and we're going to cut out a piece of ply to fit there, sandwiching in our insulation and providing a little bit of support also for a few little electrics that we're putting in here.
Well, to be able to fit those sides, we first have to match the fixing holes on the van to the boards, and we do that by cutting a sheet of polythene to the exact shape of the board. Transfer the polythene to the van side and mark the holes we'll be using with a Sharpie pen. The polythene is then placed back on the ply, secured, and gives us the perfect alignment to now pilot each point with a small drill bit. With all the holes marked, the polythene can now be removed and holes drilled out to 9 or 10mm. I will be fixing the boards with 8mm stainless steel dome-headed bolts, so need to slightly drill out the holes so we can fix some riv nuts. The near side panel is now put in place, which will be the first of many times, as we figure out the mounting and plumbing of a 60-litre over-wheel arch water tank. A scrap piece of angled alloy will assist the support over the wheel arch and can be conveniently mounted using a secure riv nut. With the tank clear of the wheel arch, the base of the tank can be checked to level using the bed frame as a guide. Once level, a suitable support was made, and happy that the tank's fixing points were ideal, again removed the side panel to now ideally locate the tank's filler location. A pilot hole was drilled, checked, and then drilled with a hole saw to a suitable diameter. The bare metal was primed with some leftover primer from a window install, before applying polyurethane sealant, and finally screwing the filler neck into place. Additional sealant applied on the inside gives some extra reassurance, before we mark on the tank an ideal location for the inlet. A suitable hole is cut out of the tank, and any plastic swarf removed with a vacuum. A bead of sealant is applied to the base of the inlet before clamping together with a plastic nut. At this point, it'll be good to mention that the location of the filler pipe should ideally be situated to allow access through the inspection hole for secure fixing, and on again goes the sidewall, to this time mark the location of the filler neck and breather holes. Back on the bench, pilot holes are drilled before cutting two holes, the larger for the filler and smaller above for the breather. That completed all workings for the water tank install, and a similar process was applied to the opposite side for the shore power install. And once some wood supports had been protected with a coat of varnish, it was now time to finally complete the install of the garage sidewalls.
Which one start on this side? This side. This side. Start on this side.
Over several van builds, it has become our favourite method to secure garden mesh to install our favourite medium of sheet wool for a very successful venting insulation system.
Ow, that's hot. Ow, that's hot.
Yeah.
That's really hot.
We've done a complete vlog on this successful system, which I will link in the description for your interest. The rear of our boards we back with foil to offer some reflective properties before finally attaching to the van side. Into goes the opposite side, and we now turn our attention to wheel arch covers. Covers of a wood frame and ply are treated to a coat of primer and white Raptor as Nikki makes ready the water tank install. Down goes the base support for the tank that lifts the tank to the desired height over the wheel arch and is secured into place. Down goes the profiled wheel arch cover, which is also secured. And Nikki applies some profiled reflective insulation which will fit between the tank and sidewall to hopefully alleviate any possible condensation problems and possibly stop any debris falling between the tank and sidewall. Insulation packed the remainder of the wheel arch. A top was fitted where the tank falls short, and finally the tank went into place and was secured with supplied brackets that located into pre-existing fixings, one on the top and one on the side. With no systems on the van side beneath the offside window, the wall covering was an easy install. All the coverings so far will not be visible in the van's habitat, with this one being behind a kitchen unit, so any usual install of a frame system has been totally unnecessary, speeding the build along and also omitting any decorative panels where you're not going to be seeing them. The van's own framework has supplied us everything we need so far, saving time and weight, and as we progress with the build, you'll see just how much more this van already provides for us. Before finally installing, the offside wheel arch is given some useful electric ports using CBE sockets. The wheel arch is then fixed, shore power installed, and through a junction box, a 240 volt supply taken to the rear of the van, along with a 12 volt port. The supply cables run safely through the wheel arch cover, with a secure lid. Equal measurements are now taken along the lengths of our angled alloy bed supports. Holes are drilled out to 9mm, deburred, vacuumed, and cross pieces of 40x40 extruded aluminium offered up for fixing. Chamfered bolts twist into place in the slot of the extruded alloy, passes through the angled supports, and is then securely clamped down with a nut. Supported across a short width, we could use 9mm ply placed in strips. In such a way there is very little flex and can save much weight. From underneath, the beam positions were marked, and back on the bench, marked and drilled to take fixings to bolt down tight onto the extruded alloy. Then came the laborious job of piloting and hole sawing what seemed to be an endless number of ventilation holes, which were equally and laboriously individually sanded before being given the mandatory prime, sand and paint with White Raptor. 10mm angled alloy was profiled and with a careful file taken and bonded to the corners of the wheel arches, making neat the now finished bed over garage build. That's the bed frame finished over the garage. Sound deadened, insulated, boarded and painted with first fit electrics and plumbing. It's cost £1,150, bringing the grand total of the bill so far to £3,210. Could it have been done any cheaper? Well, of course it could. You could have opted to use IKEA's Scorva beams instead of using very expensive extruded aluminium. You can make do with an old water container instead of an overarch water tank. And you can choose to unprotect any wooden boarding, as many do. Remember, there's no right or wrong ways, just budgets and compromises. How does this garage build compare to our own? With more off-grid use in mind, our garage build was designed to carry much more stuff, besides a spare water tank and an electrical system made up of separates. To access all that stuff, we adopted a slide-out system that required much stronger supports, which brought the cost to well over £2,000. In part 4 of this van build series, we will be insulating and panelling the ceiling and tarting up the boudoir.